Our second panelist, Professor Guillermina Jasso, has a great title of her talk, Inequality, Justice, and Future China-Japan Cooperation. As you know, she's a Silver Professor of Sociology here at NYU, and she's had a fantastic career, and it continues. So let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind words. It's great to be here today. What I'm going to do in these very few minutes, and they're going to be really few, is invite you to think with me about one element in this world of China, Japan, and every human on this planet. And what I'm going to invite you to think about is the sense of justice. It grows out of that magic word we heard in the first panel. Harris mentioned inequality. Inequality, justice, social outcomes, stability. That's what I want to talk about. When we speak of the wealth of nations is its people. And one of the hallmarks of the human experience is the sense of justice. Now, to jump to the very end, because I may have to stop dead in my tracks before I get to the end, the key thing I want to leave with you is that we have very little, perhaps no data from China on the human sense of justice. Of course, we know lots of anecdotes, and of course, we have history and revolutions, etc. But the study of justice has achieved an extraordinarily rigorous theory and infrastructure in the last 30 years. And that is not yet reflected in empirical work in China. And so I encourage everyone to think about starting empirical work on the sense of justice in China. Okay, there's a basic theme. I'm going to be racing through slides, but you've already heard it: inequality, justice, social outcomes. We've got to understand all of that. I'd like to give you some highlights on three things. First principles on inequality and justice, a little bit but not much on frontiers. We don't have time, but there's a very active research frontier right now, lots of things we know we don't know and we know we need to know. And then finally, a special look at China and Japan. The first thing about first principles, the key thing, and all economists know this, is goods and bads. We're not interested only in wealth. We're also interested in all the harms, the burdens, the bads that come to people, and how those are distributed, and what the sense of justice is about them. With inequality, I want to leave you with two thoughts. One of them is that there are two types of inequality. Inequality between persons, such as that measured by the Gini coefficient, and inequality between subgroups, young, old, men, women, different religions, countryside, city, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it turns out that there's recent work that shows that in at least a well-specified class of distributions, these two track each other. They vary together. You know one, you know the other. So that's the first thing I want to leave you with about first principles. The second is that there are inputs and outcomes. So for example, wealth produces status. Wealth produces power. Wealth produces self-esteem. There's inequality in the input. There's inequality in the outcome. And one of the things we're trying to learn is how do individuals choose whether to care about the inequality in the input or the inequality in the outcome. So I will leave you with those thoughts about first principles in the study of inequality, plus the fact that there are some new results that indicate that there are new levers that perhaps we didn't fully appreciate, including secret ballots, universal suffrage for reducing inequality. All right, Let's move now to first principles in justice. The key thing is that people form ideas about what is fair, and they assess the fairness or unfairness of the rewards that they and others receive. And these ideas and assessments set in motion a large train of behavioral and social consequences, which we're trying to understand. A lot of them are counterintuitive, and I want to suggest to you that understanding these in China is a prime goal. This is basically the map. This is what happens with the sense of justice. I'm going to skip a lot of the formalization here. This is basically to let you know that, yes, a lot has been accomplished in the last 30 years. We have a formula, the justice evaluation function, which embeds in it, among many other characteristics and properties, loss aversion, very important. It also leads to a justice index. It's average, the average of the justice evaluations. And the key thing I want to leave you with about the justice index is that it can be decomposed into two components: injustice due to poverty and injustice due to inequality. And these can be quantified with the right data. And the right data are not that complicated. And so I want to, again, urge that these data, that steps be taken to acquire these data in China. And then this slide is just to highlight some of the unexpected findings. The greater the overall inequality, say the Gini coefficient, the greater the conflict between subgroups, and this can be shown analytically. On the other hand, the greater the overall inequality, the greater the public benefit of religion. I think that's something Marx knew. And then there's these interesting results for effects of husbands' inequality and wives' inequality on divorce rates. And they're opposite each other, by the way, and there's already some empirical evidence for them. I'm going to skip through most of the frontiers, but one of the frontiers I do want to highlight is that it turns out that there's a lot that individuals, you and me, can do to reduce inequality. We don't have to rely on what governments or firms do. We can do it ourselves. And so there's a bunch of things. One idea, of course, goes back to Plato, and that's rich marry poor. But then another is, as I was saying just a minute ago, secret ballots, larger committees, universal suffrage, etc. All right, let's now go taxes. This is one of the frontiers. One can use data on actual pre-tax income and what individuals think is their just post-tax income to estimate an empirically based, just linear tax system. And in this phrase, just means it will be perceived as just by the people who are taxed. And of course, as you know, this is key to tax compliance and key to a long-term stable tax structure. Now, China and Japan. Inequality measurement, I think, is in very good hands. There's the UN, the World Bank, OECD only covers Japan, not China, and then the Atkinson, Piketty size World Wealth and Income Database. So all our data needs, or many of our data needs with respect to inequality, are well covered. They are in good hands. Unfortunately, we can't say the same for justice. There have been, in the last 30 years, 2 landmark studies that were international. China participated in one of them, Japan in 2 rounds of one of them, but those were early studies. And now there has been an enormous improvement, enhancements in the apparatus for studying the sense of justice. And the time is thus now ripe for studying the sense of justice. And so I want to say just a couple of things about a new survey that this is part of the European Social Survey. By its name, you know it does not cover China or Japan. But this European Social Survey is planning a new justice and fairness module for its 9th round in 2018. There's an enormous amount of work going on each question in each language to cover what individuals think about justice for themselves and what individuals think about justice for others, equally important in the sense of justice. Some of the questions are innovative. Others are being asked with new and impressive rigor. This is the kind of module that would be good to field in both China and Japan. Goes beyond any other study of justice in Japan, that Japan has participated in, or in China. There's an international survey team developing this for the European Social Survey. It was won by competition, I might add. And then the final note I will leave you with is that there is a model for how to ask justice questions in large surveys. And the leader in that enterprise is in Germany. It's the German Socioeconomic Panel. And it is no accident that most of the individuals in this new justice and fairness effort for the European Social Survey have all, at one time or another, been associated with or used data from the German Socioeconomic Panel. So my final words, let's go out there and see the sense of justice in China. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.